After 22 years of nightmare and terror, saved only by a desperate conviction of the mythical source of certain impressions. I am unwilling to vouch for the truth of that which I think I found in Western Australia on the night of 17 July 1930. It was, moreover, a frightful confirmation of all I had sought to dismiss as myth and dream. When I came upon the horror, I was alone, and I have up to now told no one about it. Now, in my cabin on my way home from Australia, I write these words. My name is Nathaniel Wingate Peasley. I was born and reared in Amarillo, at the old homestead in Boardman Street near Golden Hill, and did not go to Harcum till I entered Miskatonic University as instructor of political economy in 1895. For 13 years, more of my life ran smoothly and happily. I married Alice Keyser Haverhill in 1890s, and my 3 children, Robert, Wingate, and Hannah were born. In 1890, I became an associate professor, and in 1902 a full professor. At no time had I the least interest in either occultists or abnormal psychology. It was on Thursday, 14 May 1908. I had a terrible headache for a few hours after I got up, and I had a singular feeling altogether new to me that someone else was trying to get possession of my thoughts. 10:20, while I was conducting a class in political economy VI for juniors, I began to see strange shapes before my eyes and to feel that I was in a grotesque room other than the classroom. My thoughts and speech wandered from my subject, and I slumped down unconscious in my chair in a stupor from which no one could arouse me. Nor did my rightful faculties again look out upon the daylight of our normal world. For 5 years, or months, and 13 days. It is from others that I have learned what followed. I showed no sign of consciousness for 16.5 hours, though removed to my home at 27 Crane Street, and given the best of medical attention. At 3 a.m., my eyes opened, and began to speak. My family were thoroughly frightened by the trend of my expression and language. It was clear that I had no remembrance of my identity in my past, though for some reason seemed anxious to conceal his lack of knowledge. My eyes glazed strangely at the persons around me, and the flexions of my facial muscles were altogether unfamiliar. Even my speech seemed awkward and foreign. I used my vocal organs clumsily and gropingly, and my diction had a curiously stilted quality, as if I had laboriously learned the English language from books. The pronunciation was barbarously alien, whilst the idiom seemed to include both scraps of curious orchesm and expressions of a wholly incomprehensible cast. Physical strength returned at once, although I required an odd amount of re-education in the use of my hands, legs, and bodily apparatus in general. When I saw that my attempts to conceal the lapse had failed, I admitted it openly, and became eager for information of all sorts. They noticed that I lost interest in my proper personality, and my chief efforts were to master certain points in history, science, language, art, and folklore, some of them tremendously abstruse, and some childishly simple which remained, very oddly in many cases, outside my consciousness. At the same time, they noticed that I had an inexplicable command of many almost unknown sorts of knowledge, and I had a way of speaking of the future which 2 or 3 times caused actual fright. I seemed anomalously avid to absorb the speech, customs, and perspectives of the age around me, as if I were a studious traveler from a far, foreign land. As soon as permitted, I haunted the college library at all hours. My travels, however, were singularly extreme, involving long visits to remote and desolate places. In 1909, I spent a month in the Himalayas, and in 1911 roused much attention through a camel trip into the unknown deserts of Arabia. During the summer of L9L2, I chartered a ship and sailed in the Arctic north of Spitzbergen, and afterward showing signs of disappointment. Later in that year, I spent weeks alone beyond the limits of previous or subsequent exploration in the vast limestone cavern systems of Western Virginia. A real friendliness. However, I encountered little. Something in my aspect and speech seemed to excite vague fears and aversions in everyone I met. My own family formed no exception. From the moment of my strange waking, my wife had regarded me with extreme horror and loathing, vowing that I was some utter alien usurping the body of her husband. In 1910, she obtained a legal divorce, nor would she ever consent to see me even after my return to normality in 1913. I have found that my rate of reading and solitary study was phenomenal. I could master every detail of a book merely by glancing over it as fast as I could turn the leaves. There is tangible proof that I went mentally through such things as Ludwig Prinz die Vermis Mysteris, the unscrupulous Colton of Vengeance, and the dreaded necromonachon of the matter of Abdul Lannister. And scholars suspected of connection with nameless bands of abhorrent elder world hierophants. In the summer of 1913, I began to display signs of a new and flagging interest. I returned to Arkham and reopened my long-closed house in Crane Street. There I installed a mechanism of the most curious aspect, constructed piecemeal by different makers of scientific apparatus in Europe and America. On the evening of Friday, 20th September, I dismissed the housekeeper and the maid until noon of the next day. A lean, dark, curiously foreign-looking man called in an automobile. It had 215, and the Straker's motor still at the curb. By 4 o'clock, the motor was certainly gone. It was at 6 o'clock that a hesitant foreign voice on the telephone asked Dr. Wilson to call at my house and bring me out of a peculiar faint. When the doctor reached my house, he found me unconscious in the sitting room in an easy chair. The coil machine was gone. At 11:00 on 27th September, I stirred vigorously, and my hitherto mask-like face began to show signs of expression. Then just after noon, I began to mutter in English. Nathaniel Wingate Peasley had come back. The spirit in whose time scale it was still Thursday morning in 1908. However, this was not the end of the matter. For the next 20 years, I was haunted by vague dreams and strange ideas. I began work with the February 1914 term, but the dreams and disturbed feelings gained on me, so that I had to drop my regular work in 1915. As time went on, my dreams became more vivid and more real. At first, the visions weren't scary, just weird. I felt as if I were in a grand vaulted room, and I did not know where it was or what time it belonged to. I went up and down huge slopes in the same huge stone building where there were no stairs. I saw many amazingly large checkerboard pools, and many rooms with all sorts of strange and bizarre instruments. Later, I also saw huge caves and complex machines installed in them. With the large round windows and from the wide flat roof, I saw more scenery. The gardens were everywhere, so strange that it was almost frightening. In the garden, the most common is unusually wide fern vegetation. The large garden on the ground seems to have done its best to keep the original look of nature, while the garden on the roof has a distinctly horticultural character. The sky is almost always white and cloudy. Occasionally, I can see a clear night sky with many constellations, but I can hardly make out the constellations. Judging by the handful of barely recognizable constellations, I guessed I was somewhere in the southern hemisphere. Then I had a new dream. I floated past many buildings, tall buildings stretching to countless miles. Some of these buildings reached thousands of feet into the sky. In some places, I saw majestic black cylindrical towers, towering above the rest. These towers seemed to belong to an entirely different world and show signs of extreme antiquity and decay. Inside the tower were layers of dark cellars and trapdoors sealed with metal bars. Some of the buildings, similar to the black cylindrical towers, seemed to have weathered hundreds of millions of years and all looked crumbling. There was an unexplainable sense of terror around these block-cut piles of rock, similar to the metal bars that sealed the trapdoors. I saw endless long roads through the jungle, and I saw other cities that were just as strange as the one that had always troubled me. I saw the ocean, a vast expanse of water haunted by steam that stretched beyond the majestic city of arches and domes. Huge stone jetties were built on the edge of the city. The truly terrifying nightmare began in May 1915. That's when I saw my first living thing in a dream. Seeing grotesque things do things that only humans can do often gives us a great shock. They communicate with other individuals by tapping and scraping the pincers at the ends of their lungs. They can read, write, and manipulate machines very quickly, and from these actions I think they have far superior intelligence. I had been trying to avoid looking down in my dreams until one night, when I couldn't help but glance down. It was only after weeks of reliving these horrible dreams that I reluctantly accepted the terrible image of myself in my dreams. In my dreams, I often read horrible books pulled down from shelves as far as the eye could see, most of such material written in hieroglyphics or some other unknown language. With the help of some buzzing machine, I learned these languages in a very strange way. There are also books and languages I know, but they are very few and far between. By October 1915, I began to study cases of amnesia and hallucinations in detail, hoping to determine the source of the nightmares. One particular kind of account came to my attention. These accounts range from ancient folklore to medical reports, and even one or two anecdotes that have been lost in official history. According to these accounts, the affliction that befell me was a very rare disease. Since the beginning of recorded human history, only one case has been found every very long time. These records always have the same content. A sharp mind, after a coma, leads a very different and strange life. He will learn all aspects of knowledge at an extraordinary rate. Then, at some point, the patient would suddenly return to his normal personality and intermittently dream of strange scenes after that. These nightmares are so similar to my dreams that even the smallest details confirm each other. In 1917 and 1918, I began to read horrible books about old taboo legends. Some of the texts I saw were the same books that my second personality had read. There is a note in Bonan's nameless book of sacrifices which uses a curval and a pictograph. These hieroglyphics are undeniably closely related to the symbols that often appear in my dreams, and I sometimes feel vaguely that I can read them. The librarians assured me that all these notes were written by my alter ego. It was around 1920 that a coherent outline of my work finally emerged. Primal myth and modern delusion joined in their assumption that mankind is only one of the highly evolved and dominant races of this planet's long and largely unknown career. Things of inconceivable shape, they implied, had reared towers to the sky and delved into every secret of nature before the first amphibian for barren man had crawled out of the hot sea 300 million years ago. Some had come down from the stars. A few were as old as the cosmos itself. Others had arisen swiftly from tearing germs. But most of the tales and depressions concerned a relatively late race of a queer and intricate shape resembling no life form known to science, which had lived till only 50 million years before the advent of man. This, they indicated, was the greatest race of all because it alone had conquered the secret of time. The spirit of the great race did not originate on Earth. They were the inhabitants of a black planet called Youth, the dying planet outside the galaxy. Having mastered the ultimate secret, they set out to search for new worlds and races that would allow the species to survive. Finally, they project their spiritual totality on the race best suited to their occupation, the cone-shaped creatures that inhabit our planet. The great race can project its spirit into the river of time and travel to the time it wants to go. When the spirit arrives at a predetermined time, it selects the best of all the highest forms of life it can find and enters that creature's brain. The displaced spirit is then sent back into the intruder's body to become a prisoner. After the prisoner had calmed his surprise and resentment, the great race would require prisoners to write down in their own language the knowledge of their own time. In exchange, prisoners receive rewards such as wandering around all habitable areas, or explore the world in giant atomic vehicles that look like ships. And the freedom to delve and study in the great library of records about the planet's past and future. Sometimes, the great race allows certain prisoners to meet with other prisoners. It was as if in my dreams, by tapping the strange language of pincers, I had spoken to other intelligent beings brought here from all corners of the solar system. In addition to these alien races, I also saw some spirits that originally belonged to various subspecies of human beings. They told so many shocking secrets and dazzling wonders that it was almost beyond the capacity of my brain. In my dreams, I seemed to have been recording in English the events of my own time. The records I wrote are in the central archives of the great race. Because of frequent dreams of working in the archives and looking at books, I know it very well. As required, the materials I compose are placed in the lowest storage compartment. It is dedicated to the culture developed by vertebrates, including humans. The great races have shown endless fear of the great sealed trap doors in the lowest subterranean levels. The basis of the fear was a horrible elder race of half-polypos, which had come through space from immeasurably distant universes and had dominated the Earth and 3 other solar planets about 600 million years ago. They were only partly material as we understand matter. Their minds were of such texture that no exchange with them could be effected by the great race. When these things had come to the Earth, they had built mighty basalt cities of windowless towers. The newcomers, with the instruments they created, had found it easy to subdue the predatory entities and guide them down to those caverns of inner Earth. But as the eons passed, the elder things were growing strong and numerous in the inner world. The spirit, projected into the future, predicts a terrible end, which is clearly related to the elder things. At the same time, by traveling back into the future, the great race learns that while the post-human beetle race to flourish, the elder things were completely extinct. And so those beetle race became the next target of the great race's spiritual diversion. After learning the complete legend of the great race, I gradually came to a reasonable explanation for my strange dreams. During the 5 years of amnesia, my second personality studied all the books on the great racial legends, and this information subconsciously influenced my brain, which triggered these strange and concrete dreams. Under the aegis of this insight, I greatly improved my mental state. And after 1920, I led a very normal life of work and recreation. I prepared a series of articles briefly covering the whole ground and illustrated with crude sketches of some of the shapes, scenes, decorative motifs, and hieroglyphs remembered from the dreams. These appeared at various times in the Journal of the American Psychological Society, but did not attract much attention. On July, there was forwarded to me by the Psychological Society the letter which opened the culminating and most horrible phase of the whole matter deal. The letter was from a mining engineer, Mr. Mackenzie. 2 years ago, while exploring in the depths of the Western Australian desert, he saw many stones carved with strange arc-shaped symbols. These stones were exceptionally ancient, and the carved arc symbols were remarkably similar to those I had depicted in my dream. The local Aborigines spoke of these stones with symbols of apparent great fear. I was fortunate to receive support from Miskatonic University and assembled an expedition team. The members include William Dyer, a professor from the Geology Department of Miskatonic University, who was the leader of the Miskatonic Antarctic Expedition in 1930. Ferdinand C. Ashley from the Department of Ancient History, Tyler M. Freeburn from the Anthropology Department, and my son Wingate. On March, we set sail from Boston on a steamer. On June 3 red, we encountered the first group of megaliths partially buried under the gravel. My hands began to tremble uncontrollably when I recognized part of the curved decorative pattern. We dug for a month and found about 1250 stones that had been worn and weathered to varying degrees. First week of July arrived, the land to the northeast evoked me a series of inexplicably complex emotions. Additionally, I began to suffer from insomnia. Gradually, I developed the habit of taking solitary walks in the desert at night, usually towards the northeast, as those newfound impulses seemed to subtly push me in that direction. On July 17 th, the wind blew all day. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. Around 11 o'clock, I got up from bed and began to wander as usual. There was not a breath of wind in the desert, and for nearly 5 hours it remained calm. At around 3:30 a.m., a sudden violent wind woke everyone who remained in the camp. Just before 4 o'clock, the sun and gale just as abruptly dissipated. At 5 o'clock, the fun-wood-colored bloated moon began to set in the west. I stumbled back to the campy clothes and tatters covered in scratches and bloodstains. I told everyone that I had grown tired while walking and dozed off on the sand, dreaming of things more horrible than usual. The sudden wind woke me, and in my panic to return, I stumbled countless times over the stones, leaving me in tatters and disarray. I told them to change the focus of our excavation and urged the others not to carry out any excavations in the northeast direction. But the reasons I gave were clearly somewhat unconvincing. The next day, realizing that I couldn't stop the excavation work, I decided to go home as soon as possible. Now I sit in the cabin on my way home, preparing to narrate as simply as possible the events of that night after I left the camp. There was no wind that night. I didn't know where to go, yet I still moved forward step by step as if I had long known the arrangement of fate. My dreams began to flood into the waking world around me. I was both in the dream and in the waking world. Then I saw a pile of stones that the wind had blown free of sand during the day. When I saw this pile of stones, I didn't know how long or how far I had walked. But it was the largest pile of stones I had ever seen. The curved patterns on these stones were closely related, part of a very large decorative pattern. In this desolate desert that has undergone infinite turmoil, I encountered for the first time a pile of relics still in their original position. Slowly, I barely began to understand the structure of the building that once stood here, and it perfectly matched certain scenes I had glimpsed in my dreams, filling me with terror and dread. Suddenly I felt a barely detectable faint chill emanating from the cracks between the stones at the center of this heap of ruins. With a strength beyond my imagination, the enormous stones one by one, and finally I saw a dark crack, an opening large enough for me to enter. I took out my flashlight and cast a beam of light into the entrance. I saw a mess of debris left behind by the collapsed buildings. I passed through the opening and began a crazy journey along the sloping path. To save battery, I intermittently turned the flashlight on and off, searching for a way to climb down. Eventually, I stepped onto a flat area covered with collapsed stones, gravel, and various debris. On either side of me stood thick stone walls, and the tops of the walls supported a huge dome. Their style was identical to what I had seen in countless nightmares, which for the first time made me feel genuine fear from the bottom of my heart. In my dreams, I was as familiar with this place as I was with my own house on Klein Street in Arkham. I could accurately determine my exact position in the city, and this instinctive confidence was eerie. In the dreams, the Grand Central Archive building for the history of the entire solar system, and the great race had built and fortified this place with extraordinary skills, ensuring it would last as long as the solar system itself. Is the path to the Central Archive still open? As I thought of those astonishing records stored on rust-proof metal shelves, the fate that drove me forward began to pull at my brain stubbornly. I began to climb up and down, stumbling through the darkness. I could feel the damp, cold air falling around me, realizing that there must be a series of huge, dark abysses deeper and farther underground. I found the downward slope and followed it deeper. After reaching the next level, I stumbled through an archway with rooms on both sides. Then I passed under a cellar of a windowless tower and saw some deep holes leading down. In my dreams, these holes were always tightly sealed. Now they were wide open, emitting a damp, cold air current. After traversing the easterly block passage, I climbed over a small mountain of ceiling collapsed debris, entering a vast space. I immediately turned towards the familiar arch on my left, strangely without a hint of doubt. This tunnel would lead me from beneath the city to the Central Archive. I couldn't help but run full speed along the tunnel. Before long, many large metal cabinet doors engraved with hieroglyphs appeared sinisterly in front of me. Even after an eon beyond my understanding, the Central Archive still maintained its basic outline. In the light of the flashlight, I noticed something unusual about the dust on the ground. There seemed to be several lines of complex marks, about a foot square, which seemed to extend into different directions, as if something had walked to a certain place and then turned back. The fate that drove me forward conquered the fear, guiding me towards a metal cabinet door. I seemed to be eerily familiar with that place to a pathological degree. With an incredible skill, I opened the latch on the cabinet door. Inside was a row of metal boxes, and when I clearly saw the curved writing on one of them, I couldn't help but tremble with pain. After getting down from the cabinet, I knelt in the sandy dust, turned the box over, opened the lid, and trembled as I took the book out. In the darkness, I mustered the courage to finally open the cover. The flashlight's light swept across the open pages, and I only looked for a brief moment before collapsing to the ground. It was exactly what I had anticipated and what I feared. I'm not sure when I stumbled to my feet and began to make my way back. The metal box added an extra burden to me, and I found that maintaining quiet while walking among all sorts of gravel and debris was becoming an increasingly difficult problem. Finally, while climbing over a pile of rocks, a sliding boulder suddenly created an unprecedented commotion. I thought I heard a sharp whistling sound. The sound was unlike any other in the world. On a sudden downward slope, I slipped in a pile of rocks and made a huge noise. As the echoes of the collapse gradually calmed down, the sound reverberating in the tunnel gradually turned into a terrifying eerie whistle. This time, I definitely did not mishear. Vaguely, I remember running through the cellar as a fierce ordeal burst out of those abysses that emitted the whistling sound, sweeping through the entire cellar. I remember running and jumping through all sorts of obstacles. Now the essence of pure nightmare was upon me. At the moment I exerted every ounce of my strength to leap over a crack, a crazy maelstrom of loathsome whistling, intangible darkness engulfed me. This is the end of that experience as far as I can remember. What followed was purely the mutterings of a dream. I dreamed of being chased by the wind, constantly climbing and crawling, entering the moonlight that seemed to mock me. Behind me, the ruins began to slide and collapse in a dreadful storm. My flashlight was gone, the box was gone. I looked back over my shoulder, only to see the rolling yellow sands of the desert stretching out. I've said before that the nightmares that have tormented me over the years hide a terrible truth, and it is related to the book that lay in the metal box. Since the appearance of humans, no one has ever seen that book, nor has anyone touched it. When I shone my flashlight on it, I saw that the script was not any unknown writing from earlier. Written on it were letters and symbols that I was familiar with. All English words and sentences that I had written with my own hand.